Y'all knew I was gonna squeeze out just one more video about the next generation consoles, right? I had to, especially with this bad boy sitting right next to me. The next generation game consoles are great for a lot of things. Higher frame rates, higher resolutions, new graphics, stunning visuals, ray tracing, 120 Hz, 4K, 4K at 120 Hz, variable refresh rate, lots of things, which I look forward to experiencing on my OLED that I purchased and talked about, that's sitting at my new studio waiting for me to finish it. In the meantime, while I've been moving, however, I still wanted to play some games, and I wanted to take things in a different direction. In this video, I'm talking about my experiences playing the next generation PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X on a CRT. A BVM D24 CRT, but a CRT nonetheless. We'll talk about it right after this. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people on topics including illustration, design, photography and video, freelancing, and more. I personally recommend checking out the DIY product photography course by Rachel and Daniel from the Mango Street channel for those of you wanting to start your own YouTube channel. Skillshare classes fit your schedule and skill level and combine video lessons with a class project. No matter what 2021 brings, you can spend it creating something meaningful with Skillshare's online classes. It's less than $10 per month with an annual subscription, and the first 1,000 of you to sign up with my link in the video description or going to eposvox.gg/Skillshare free will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. Sign up and check it out. I'm EposVox, your stream professor, and if you haven't been able to tell by the channel's branding and my room here and everything like that, I am huge into retro tech and retro gaming. I love CRTs, I love analog, and despite the fact that I also love modern technology, I love pairing the two and see how they compare and contrast. I've previously released multiple video essays about CRT televisions and monitors and the differences between them and the differences between them and modern TVs and monitors, and why I, for some purposes, prefer CRTs over LCDs, and the history and all of that. I have a playlist of these videos linked in the video description. And in this video, I'm kind of like culminating all of that information as well as the next generation beastly game consoles to actually play them on a CRT. This big metal box right here is the Sony Trinitron BVM D24. It is a 24-inch broadcast video monitor, which was used in broadcast studios for their program monitors for editing, things like that. There's also professional video monitors, or PVMs, which were usually used on TV sets, film sets, things like that, and for color grading and things like that. This one is a 16:9 TV, or monitor, not a TV, which means it can do widescreen. Not only that, it can do up to 1080i, including 720p in those widescreen formats, while remaining analog. And if you haven't seen my video essays about this, the reason this matters is if you keep a completely analog signal chain here, then you get no latency. CRTs have pretty much zero input latency when it comes to playing your games and the video being displayed to the TV. It's like 0.00001 milliseconds or whatever. There's zero input latency, which means it's fast, it's responsive, and it looks super crisp. It is so hard to convey, but the difference between even a retro game running at 240p or 480i on a CRT of the same size versus an LCD, even through some of the best upscalers in the world, it's night and day just how sharp this tube is. This tube is far sharper and better at conveying an image than most LCD monitors. And so I wanted to put the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 to the test here. I ran them at 720p because I don't like the 1080i flicker that I get on this. It does flicker a little too much for my taste. 720p is great. And I played the next generation games and had a lot of fun. So on the PlayStation side of things, of course, I had to first boot up Spider-Man Miles Morales, which is one of the best looking games on the console at this point in time, and it is absolutely gorgeous. This game is beautiful. I am actually running it in resolution mode or quality mode so that it is running at 4K 30 FPS with ray tracing on, but then it's super sampling with an even integer scale down to the 720p image. So I'm getting ray tracing, but I'm also getting it at 720p. Now, a lot of people on Twitter have brought up, and I do kind of wish that they gave you an option to run it at higher frame rates at a lower resolution, because if it can run ray tracing at 4K 30, it can most likely run ray tracing at 720p 60. However, that's not really the pixel pushing format that sells the console, and that's not what most people are probably doing. But I know a lot of people would rather have higher frame rates at 1080p than lower at 4K. The same thing here. If I could run this at 720p 60 with ray tracing on, it would be absolutely gorgeous. But of course, it controls like a dream. I had not actually played Spider-Man on PS4 yet, so I was stoked to get into this, and I have become addicted. Every time I play, I lose way too much time, and it is absolutely gorgeous. And honestly, ray tracing, even on the CRT, looks great because I get the sharp, beautiful world. I still see the reflections, and it just all looks so natural and perfect IMO. I had to play a couple shooters as well, of course, because I had to test, the input latency, my reflexes on it, and of course it felt significantly better. I have been playing my 4K consoles on one of my production video monitors from Dell, and even though they have a game mode, they still have quite a bit of input latency compared to fast gaming monitors or a CRT or what have you. And so I've been so used to whenever I'm doing my capture card test or whatever to having, super high input lag and not really focusing on how well I did. Apex Legends performed like a dream on here, running at 720p, no frame drops whatsoever, as well as really fast input latency for playing the game and enjoying it, which was pretty cool. Black Ops Cold War, the same thing here. However, both of these are games that I think I would rather, while Black Ops Cold War plays great on here, although I was having some network lag due to the Wi-Fi up there, the input latency felt fine. You do run into a trade-off when playing shooters here, and the same thing with Master Chief Collection over on Xbox Series X, which we'll talk about in a moment. You run into a trade-off because with something like this, you're getting no input latency in the signal chain here, because I'm using a lag-free Porta HDMI to component converter. They have a scaler that does have input latency, but the normal non-scaler does not have input latency. Both me and Bob from Retro RGB have tested this multiple times. I'll have it linked below. You're getting no signal chain input latency here in terms of video display, but you're missing out on the 120 hertz benefit of running things on a 120 hertz monitor and getting the higher frame rates, which also give you lower input latency and give you higher, response to your gameplay sessions, which we'll talk about in a little bit in a future video once I can actually capture that more easily. But 120 hertz gives you a lot more benefits for your accuracy, for your, enemy tracking and all of that than just having a completely lag-free display does. And so that's kind of a trade-off I'm making here. I'm really enjoying shooters on this, but I also run into the lower resolution actually hurts me here. And I ran into this when I was playing shooters on my PC CRT monitor. The smaller size and the lower resolution actually makes it harder to resolve enemies on screen and to see them as accurately as blown up on a 27 or 32 inch monitor at 4K, where it can resolve that detail a little bit better. So this is I would say for story games, CRT is perfect. For shooters, for multiplayer, tiny detail Twitch games, I would say maybe not so much, because you're missing out on 120 hertz. Although with the FW900 CRT monitor that's been my holy grail for a long time, it actually uses the same tube as my D24, but it can run at 120 hertz. That would mitigate some of that, but it'd still be too low resolution for shooters these days, IMO. Playing older shooters would be fine, because they're built for that, but newer shooters are built for you to have a lot of tiny detail, and you just don't get that here. Story-based games, however, are absolutely brilliant on here, and in most cases, other than situations where you have to choose between ray tracing or not, you have no reason to put it in resolution mode because you're running it at 720p. Even the downsampling is kind of beat out by the frames you can get. So most of these games I was running in the performance mode, like Godfall here, which is absolutely gorgeous. This game is beautiful, and it's kind of fun, if not a little slow and sluggish. But it looks absolutely phenomenal on this tube and was a lot of fun to play. You have Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. That lower input latency means my platforming skills are not quite as terrible as I'm used to, even though they're still bad. Demon's Souls, you can of course run into performance mode and you're not missing out on any resolution or any features here. Plays and controls absolutely wonderfully. This is the best way to play Demon's Souls right now. Then of course you have Devil May Cry 5, which runs at 120 hertz if you have the option and has ray tracing, but just running in the normal performance mode on here controls like a dream too. However, this is another game I'd love to see kind of blown up with the higher frame rates and the higher detail, just to see all the nice graphics that the game has to offer. So that's the PlayStation side of things. The PS5 is absolutely brilliant here. It of course works wonderfully, it looks phenomenal, and it plays in 720p, so no real issues there. I'm glad that they maintain lower resolution support through here. With HDMI, there's really no reason not to, but you never know with Sony. They did cut out the optical port and whatever. Of course, it looks Honestly, the PS5 is so big that it actually looks kind of appropriate here next to this giant CRT monitor. I call it a TV, it's a monitor. Because it's about the same size, it actually fits kind of appropriately, even if the design styles are literally like generations apart. But the Xbox Series X is maybe a bit more appropriate of a console to pair with it in terms of aesthetics, because the Xbox Series X is also just a giant rectangle. So sitting it next to it, it just kind of looks like it's a tumor on the side of it or something, like a little extension. Looks pretty good. So of course I had to, boot up some games in that as well. Now the cool thing here, I think, about the Xbox versus the PlayStation, and I talked about that in my review of it, and I talk about it all the time. Xbox has backwards compatibility going back to the original Xbox. They've put in a ton of effort into their Play Anywhere and their backwards compatibility programs, providing enhancements to older games and providing you the ability to play so many games from the original Xbox to the Xbox 360, Xbox One, all on the Xbox Series hardware and the Xbox One hardware, and play them upscaled, higher frame rates, and things like that. And so essentially, and the PlayStation 5 doesn't. You can play PS4 games and that's it. So essentially, in a setup like this where I have a million consoles, everything connected, all of that, the Xbox Series X kind of acts as the ultimate console here, because it replaces 4 consoles, well, 3 consoles plus itself, because you have Xbox, Xbox 360, and Xbox One plus itself, all games. There are exceptions, not every game's backwards compatible, but whatever. But for many games, you play all of them in one box, even from the disc. Now the disc will download the backwards compatibility patched version and whatever, but I can use my original games, pop them in the Xbox Series X, pop in an original Xbox game in the Xbox Series X and play it on my BVM here with higher frame rates than the original Xbox allowed, with higher resolution scaled to my screen than the original Xbox allowed. And so it becomes kind of the ultimate box here. And then I can play, games like Soul Calibur, Ninja Gaiden. I can play arcade or Xbox arcade games like Double Dragon Neon. I've got the Halo Master Chief Collection if I really want to enjoy some Halo. I've got Halo 5 if I hate myself. And then you have new games as well, such as Dirt 5. That game looks absolutely gorgeous and looks really good on this TV. That game is probably some of the best graphics this TV or monitor has ever seen. I mentioned Soul Calibur. We've got Minecraft Dungeons. It's kind of cool to see Minecraft Dungeons side by side with like the Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance games that I play on here that are the older dungeon crawlers. And then you have Call of Duty games and things like that as well. And overall, I'm really glad I did this. I think for a lot of games, I think this has kind of proven to myself that I could be happy if consoles never supported past 720p and just allowed me to play on here for the end of my life in many cases. For story games, for all single player kind of RPG kind of games, racing games, whatever, sports games even, I could see myself hooking up every new console, every new game, plugging this in at 720p, never increasing my own resolution, and enjoying the games till I die. Really. Now there are some benefits, and there'd still be a wow factor of hooking it up to a 4K, 8K, whatever. But overall, I would be satisfied with that if for whatever reason, this was the only TV I had and could never use another one. This would be the one I choose. However, for multiplayer games, for first-person shooters especially these days, they are getting more and more optimized for the higher resolutions, and thus the tiny details you need to resolve, as well as high frame rates, which really do kind of benefit you more than the low latency display itself, that I think I would want to upgrade. So that's kind of why I'm glad I have the BVM paired with the LG CX OLED that I'm picking up, which they're not sponsoring this video. There are other OLED options. Sony has a lot of great options that people have pointed out, and pretty much all OLEDs at the moment suffer from some weird issue with VRR, G-Sync, as well as some gamma issues like flickering, but it's only in specific scenarios and not everybody's encountered it, but whatever. But I'm kind of glad I have them paired together because they kind of present the best of both worlds here depending on what I want. And I think I'll do a video in the future once I get finished moving where I actually kind of put them head to head, and I think that'd be a lot of fun. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to explore connecting the next generation, the latest and greatest 4K, 8K, HDR, 120 hertz gaming consoles to a BVM from like the early 2000s at the latest, most likely the 90s, and see how it turned out. Hope you enjoyed this little dive into retro tech. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more tech education and stream guides, usually not super like this. Go check out my other CRT gaming videos in the description below. I'll see you next time.